Today we're coloring this page from Romantic Country's third tale and turning this into this, so stick around. Welcome colorists to PencilStash, a weekly show all about coloring. Hit the subscribe button if you're new to the channel, as well as that like button if you're enjoying my videos. So today we're coloring this page, and I'm very taken in by this door for some reason. So much so that I wish it showed more than just half of it, but that's okay. And we're not going to color it brown. No, no, no. This door was made to be special, so we are going to color it green. We'll start with our lightest color, which is ironically not green. It's ginger root, and I'll be placing this color down just where I want a highlight. So here in some places on the door, and try to remember where your light would hit in these places where the wood is carved, as you'll want it to be roughly in the same places on the door in each carving. And then in the opposite places with your darker colors, which I'll kind of show you later. And a highlight at the top of our railing as well. Now in with our lightest green, which will be artichoke. And now here I can be a bit more random with my placement. Remember to feather your colors against one another, meaning that you want to overlap your colors with very light pressure in order to bring them together for a nice smooth transition. Oh, and don't forget to do the window trim too, like I did. Now, instead of using our next lightest green, we're actually going to jump down to the end of the spectrum with dark green. And for me, it's a bit easier to isolate those areas that I want dark at this point, rather than when all of my kind of in-between green colors are down. I like to think there's a method to my madness, but sometimes I'm not really sure why I do things the way that I do. Have you ever had to do that? Kind of try to explain, the reason that you do it. Sometimes you just know that that's the best way. And just again, that's just the best way for me. And then I like to go back in later with my kind of in-betweener colors. Okay, this is really looking like bad camouflage, but I promise it'll all come together, so just stick with me. I always equate a coloring page in progress, kind of like when you're cleaning a room, when you maybe have to kind of pull a whole bunch of stuff out to organize it. It always looks like an absolute mess before it gets better. And sometimes that's how your coloring page is going to be as well. And now in with one of our in-between greens, our mid-range Kelly green. And I'm again placing this randomly, and this color will work for the most part as kind of a filler. And I'm placing it randomly as I want the door and the woodwork here to look old and weathered. And the way that I do that is by putting in a lot of color variation. Plus, I just love the range of greens that come in the 150 set of Prismacolor colored pencils. They're one of my favorite ranges to color in, so you'll be seeing me using a lot of greens today in our woodwork. Now we use olive green, and this is the color that I'd really like to be dominant here, as though it's the color that it's really kind of meant to be if it hadn't been so weathered. So when I place this down, I'm going to not only fill in the blank spaces and feather it against the other colors, I'll also be covering some of the other colors slightly to get a layered effect. And to really drive home all these colors, we'll use our blender. If you're new to the blender, you'll be using medium pressure in either linear strokes or circular strokes to kind of push all of these colors into one another. Another benefit to the blender is that somehow it really amps up the vibrancy of our hues, which I really like. This is looking great, but I think we need to add some shadows in and really beat this wood up a bit more. So we'll do that with espresso. And we'll add it in at the bottom edges of our woodwork here, and in various places along, kind of just to add in a little bit more scuffs. Now that I'm all done with that, I noticed that for some reason the artist did not put in the bottom right corner of this window frame here. Maybe these diamond slats are kind of meant to be solid and not kind of see-through slats as I've done them. Anyway, regardless, it doesn't really matter. I like the openness of kind of leaving them as I've got them, so I'm just going to go ahead and draw in the rest of the window frame, as it should be relatively simple. I'll use my see-through quilting ruler, a pencil, and my fine point Sharpie pen to recreate the line weight that's already here. Later I'll go back in and color it with the same greens that we've already used, and it'll look like it was there from the start. Okay, back to what I was originally doing, which is using my ruler and a pencil to create the look of horizontal boards on the face of our building. And using your pencil, just add in some vertical lines equidistant from one another. Using French gray 50%, just trace over your pencil lines. Using a semi-dark color like this will give the feeling of depth or shadow or a kind of a space between these boards. Switching to French gray 20% with very, very light pressure, I'll add in some feathered wood grain. And I'm going to try to zoom in here so that you can see it, though I know it's very light and it might be a little bit difficult to see. Just do your best, and I found that I like using kind of a V pattern here to emulate that wood grain look. You can kind of vary it, maybe do some upside down Vs, stagger them to the left, stagger them to the right. It's really just very, very random, but the more random it is, the more realistic of a feel that you'll get. I love taking these large blank slate type areas and giving them some character. I did a brick facade in a previous video, so I thought it'd be really fun to do something a little bit different here. and some French gray 70% for some shadows, as well as the majority outline on our stacked stonework at the base of the building. Working backwards again, we'll use French gray 30% to fill in the stones. Use circular or kind of oval strokes overlapped over the darker areas to blend them together. French gray 90% to deepen some of these areas. And in with some olive green to simulate mildew and moss and all sorts of organic growth that might naturally kind of occur on these stones. Just a bit of cleanup with French gray 10%. Let's do some work on these baskets here, starting with ginger root. Just put in kind of a messy kind of line where the light would be hitting it in just a few places on each basket. Then we'll kind of build around that with a few other browns. This lantern is super cool too, and I'm partial to the brassy bronze fixtures right now, and I think it just kind of jives too with the period that this kind of looks like. So we'll be using some metallic gold on this one, as well as on the little chains on our flower baskets. Another reason I love this page is this adorable little doggy. I just love the look on his face. If you guys know me, you'll know I'm a crazy dog lover, and this wiener dog is no exception. He's even got a little sweater. We'll color him in sienna brown, just an all-over light layer. Then we'll go in with some chocolate to give him some dimension underneath his chin and on the bottom of his paws. For these ivy leaves up at the top of the banister, I want to differentiate them from all of the other greens that we have going on, just so that they don't kind of blend in and get lost. So in order to do that, we'll go on the lighter green spectrum. So to start, we'll just add a simple foundational layer of lime peel to build upon, and we'll even put them on these little leaves in the baskets as well. A little bit of olive green to add some character on these leaves, just make them not look so flat. Let's move on to our little old lady. In terms of color palette, I don't want to use any greens just to make sure that she stands out from the backdrop. However, I also don't want to take too much of a departure either, so I think we'll use some blue greens and some corals. And let's see how that turns out. And I know what you're thinking. Rachel, this is green. You just said we're not going to use greens, but trust me, we'll layer this and it'll end up looking more blue kind of when we're done. Now jade green, and we'll add this in just a few places along her arms and the bottom of her skirt. And in with muted turquoise to give us the punches of blue that we need. And we're just going to layer this right over top of where we put in the jade green. This blended together really nicely, but I'm just going to use my blender a little bit and use light to medium pressure when you do this. You don't have to push too hard. This blender is also adding that vibrancy too that I love and filling in any white spaces. Back to muted turquoise, just kind of clean up at this point. And I think we'll add this color as well in the flowers on her apron. And I don't want her clothes to be too matchy-matchy, but we'll kind of at least make sure that they go together. All right, now we need to punch this up, and we're going to use a coral color called NECTAR to do that. And we'll put it in the stripes on her apron and in the cutout shapes on her headscarf. Let's go neutral now with this peach beige. Neutrals are a great color to use when you have no idea what color to use. They're a great default and will kind of act as a great background color on the apron and on the headscarf. The ruffles down here at the bottom of her apron are looking just a little dull and a little flat, so we'll take our French gray 90% and just add a bit of dimension along the edges. And we'll also use this color on her checked scarf. And I'm not going to fill in the squares. I'm not too big of a fan of how that looks. So I'm simply going to trace along the lines the artist already gave us. And then fill it in with 10% French gray. This will not only fill in the squares, but it'll also kind of pull that 90% gray and kind of blow out those lines a little bit. Let's color her socks and her booties. These look like very practical shoes because she is a practical girl. Our little furry friend will get a complimentary color sweater. Let's do this planter in terracotta, and you'll see I'm using very light pressure here, and I'm almost using the flat edge of my pencil even. Adding chestnut with that same edge of my pencil, and this will give it a very kind of terracotta-esque texture on it. All right, we need another pop of color. Not too much, but something very opposite to green. So we'll use this great muted pink color on some of our flowers. And another great pop of color would be yellow. So we'll add this very sparsely by putting in the sunburst color here on our lantern light and on the flowers at the opposite end of the page to balance it out. I really struggled with what color these curtains will be, so back to my previous tip to use a neutral when you're unsure, that's exactly what I'm going to do here, because you really can't go wrong. They do have a little bit of color though, so that's good, as you'll see that I'm using colors that I previously used in other parts of the page. I talked a little bit about this in my last video, but just to drive it home again, when you're choosing colors, it's really nice to stay with the same color families across the page, or at least kind of the same tones of colors. And I'll use the same example that I used last time. Like if I had all of a sudden colored the curtains fire engine red, that would have looked really out of place on our page because one, that red isn't seen anywhere else on our page, and two, it's not the same tone as anything on the rest of the page. And using something like that can be beneficial in your artwork if you're really trying to draw the eye towards a particular spot for emphasis. And I kind of did that a little bit on our green woodwork here, as I really wanted that to be the star of the show. So everything around it will get a much more muted color palette. To finish off, let's have some more freeform fun. Now, did anyone else notice that there's a great big blank slate of ground here that's just begging for a new treatment? I did. And we haven't done flagstone, so let's try that. You don't need a ruler for this. This is going to be entirely freeform, work with your pencil. The trick here is not to overthink it. Now, each of your shapes is going to directly influence the next in terms of kind of how they fit together. So don't forget to leave the space in between for mortar. If you're unsure or not confident in your shapes to begin with, you could do kind of one of two things. You could practice on a piece of scrap paper, or you could, use your page here, but just really, really, really lightly put in your shapes with your pencil. That way you can always erase and kind of start again if you aren't happy with what you're creating. And you can always go back over those lines later to bring them out once you're happy. You'll notice I'm not going over my lines with the Sharpie pen to match the line weight and color that are already here like I have done before. And I wrestled with whether or not I should do that and decided just to kind of go ahead without it at first, as I could always go back in and add it later if I thought that I needed it. So let's just put this down and we'll see later how it turns out. First thing I'll color here is the mortar between the stones, which it will be this ginger root color. And for me, it's easier to do the mortar up front, as if I accidentally get some on the stones, it's really not going to matter, as it's going to get covered up anyway, and it's no big deal. Now, peach beige, just adding this in on most of the stones in a very random pattern. And the same thing with beige sienna, just adding in layers and layers of these different beiges and browns and all different patterns and shapes and locations on each brick, just to really make them unique as they are in nature. Now that the lighter colors are all out of the way, we'll add in our darks starting with 70% French gray. This is where they'll really start to look like flagstone because we're adding in the shadows and the ridges that will give them a realistic feel. And again, it's a little bit difficult to explain what I'm doing here, especially because each kind of brick is going to be so different. So I'll keep the video a little bit slow here so that you can watch my technique because as they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I'm just kind of finishing up here, and I've kind of decided that I don't think that our page needs me to go back in with that kind of black Sharpie to kind of outline all of the flagstone shapes that we've created. I don't think it needs it. I think it might even be a little bit too dark, and I think it might kind of make your eye go down to that flagstone when it doesn't really need to, since this green woodwork is definitely our star. And here it is all done. In total, this page took me about 3.5, 4 hours to complete, and this one was a lot of fun since I got to take not one, but two blank slates and turn them into something special. I hope you enjoyed this video tutorial today. If you did, hit that like button. It lets me know that you're enjoying my content and also helps new folks find my channel. If you're looking for even more videos, check out the rest of my channel for even more coloring tutorials, and I will see you guys next time.